All right, let's continue on. So this next release, we're going to be working on the response class, and I feel like this is where a lot of people might get lost. So we'll go real slowly through this. So the next thing it says, create a new file called response.py and create a response class. And there are some suggestions and some pointers. So number one, it should probably be initialized with the URI string and probably the dictionary of possible template variables. So Jinja is going to use template variables, and we probably need to pass that one in. And be sure to account for the situation where there aren't any template variables. Right? We're going to create a string method, a dunder method. This dunder stands for a double underscore. So there's two underscores in the front, 1, 2, dunder method. String where based off the URL string, it should be able to return a fully formatted Jinja HTML template using template variables if it's applicable. We're probably going to end up stripping all the methods from utilities and putting it inside of this class and deleting utilities.py, and we need to remove all unnecessary stuff. And by the end of the refactor, server.py should just include this tiny bit of code. If what you passed in, if the request URI is equal to slash, response equals response index, otherwise, if it's equal to time, you're going to create a response with time and passing in some of these variables here. And I'm just going to send a encoded string response to the client connection. So we can kind of see that all of this extra code right now is just, there's quite a bit of it. We're going to just make it so that it looks like this at the end. So I'm going to just grab this for now, paste it in right over here, format it correctly, and cut the rest of all of this out for right now. We can kind of see the server.py is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. We're trying to make it so that all the other classes will be responsible for other things. Right now, you'll see that there's no response class, so we'll just make that real quick. So from response, import response. It's going to say that there is no file called response. That's okay. We're going to create another file called response.py. I'm going to paste all this code in there for right now, create a class from it. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. And our goal in the end is to basically figure out, how do I strip out all of the code that was being used inside of server.py, replacing it with this, and connecting all the pieces together. So if we looked at the way things were before, let me just copy this, comment this out for right now, and put this in. Comment this out. We need a few things. We need to know the parsed request, which we have access to from this request here on line 4. We need get template, which comes from utilities. We need to know template Jinja, which probably means we need to grab this out of here and put it in there. We need to know this, the template knows how to render itself. We need to build HTML response, which is also from utilities. And this client connection.send, I think we still need to keep that. Yeah, that's what we've got here. So let's take a look at this response. We've got no methods, and pretty much all we've got is this for right now. My thought process here is just kind of reading through this. It should be initialized with a URI string and a dictionary of possible template variables. So if you take a look over here, it looks like a response class is initialized with the URI string. All right, so first things first, maybe I will say URI. And I'll say self.uri equals URI. Next, it says a dictionary of possible template variables. Looking at the ending code right here, it looks like the first one doesn't need any template variables, so we're not passing anything in. But the second one does require some template variables, so we're passing that in as a dictionary right here. My thought process, okay, so if I pass in a dictionary, keep that dictionary. Otherwise, initialize with an empty dictionary. So let's call this template variables equals empty dictionary. And I'll say self.template variables is equal to template variables. So I think we've taken care of this first bullet point. Write a method called string where based off the URN, it should be able to return a fully formatted Jinja HTML template. Right? So when I see that, I know that the Jinja template is probably not going to be put inside of here. I'm going to grab this out of here, put it in over here. I know I'm going to need a underscore stir method. I'm just going to write pass for right now because I know I'm going to need that at one point. Now, I've copied and pasted all the code that I needed a little bit earlier, and I've put it down here from lines 11 through 23. I use things like get template and build HTML response, which you can kind of see. I'm not even using build HTML response or get template from utilities.py. So I'm just going to get rid of this altogether. Go inside of utilities.py, copy all of this code, and dump it inside of response.py. Since these are all methods within a class now, I need to put self at the front. And all I need to do now is just essentially alter a bunch of the code that I used to have and put it inside of stir right over here. So we have get template. Let's see, what do we need? So we have, let me uncomment this so it's a little easier to read. Close this one out.
I don't understand what the stir method does.
Sure. So the stir method is essentially a method that's built into Python. So anytime you have a double underscore method, that's something that's built into Python. And essentially what we're doing is we are overriding the, so when you call, let's say I wanted to create a response and I said like, and I saved it in memory and I just said like response equals like response.first, so the first one in my collection. Essentially the way that it prints it, I'll show you in just a second, let's put it that way. Where was I? Okay, so on line 18, this portion, this line 18 is still part of server.py. It's on line 13 and 15, so we don't need this right now, so I'm just going to comment that. Probably don't need client connection.close, so I'm going to comment that as well. So I need to grab the HTML from the file with get template. And it looks like that we're still good with that one, but it's not going to be path anymore. I already know what the URI is. Let's take a look. Oh, it looks like I'm going to be going to /index and /time. Cool, so it looks like I already have that as part of the URI, so I can get rid of this altogether. And pass in self.uri. Again, server.py is passing over the URI, the template name that I want to use. Maybe I'll call this template name. Since it's passing in the template name, I'm going to save it as an instance variable, and then I can call it down over here. So I believe that takes care of lines 19, 25. Then I'm going to have to create an actual template from the HTML, which is right over here. So I know I'm going to need this line of code somewhere. I don't really know. Probably I'll put that there for right now. And that gets rid of lines 21 and 27. I'm going to have to render that out. So again, I'm probably going to grab this here. Put that there, and I believe I can take care of lines 23 and 29. Wait, on 23, it's going to render this first one without any sort of template variables, and the second one does need template variables. So I'm just going to pass in self.template variables right there. If there's nothing, then I'll just pass in an empty dictionary and we'll move on. Otherwise, if we do need something like the time equals datetime.now, then I'll pass that in as well. Like that, I got rid of 23. I've taken care of 25. And then right over here, I've got this body response, which uses build HTML body with this HTML body right over here. And it looks like I do need to actually just do return build HTML response with this body. So I'm going to say self.build HTML response with this HTML body that I just created. And I think I've taken care of everything that I need. So again, all I have done, where is HTML? I don't need to return it because the return comes down over here. Where the heck is HTML from file? Oh, wait, no, this is we'll call this HTML from file. It's equal to self.getTemplate, and that's it. So all I've done really, I haven't written any new code. I've moved code from one area into another area. I can get rid of utilities.py because I've taken all the code out of there. I've got a little bit simpler, I've got this to be a little bit simpler now. I've just basically passed off a bunch of code to the request and the response library. I've got this response library over here. I've basically translated the code from server.py into more object-oriented programming using this. And let's just see if the server runs the same way that we expect. Clear, Python server.py. We're just hanging out right now. What port are we on? 9291. We're going to go to slash and then slash time. Oh my God, no. Okay, let's try slash time. And this is also broken.
When you Jinja needs the template to be assigned to a variable. I don't think you can pass self-template variable.
Let's find out.
Because the return comes from HTML, build HTML font, and the standard method.
Yep.
I looked so hard for dynamic.
The time is now that. All right.
So you don't need time. You can just pass in.
Yeah.
Pass in the entire object.
Like, I was trying to find a way to dynamically do that.
Yeah, I'll be done.
So, like,
yep.
So, like, before you use render, you have to pass in the template variables, right? You just pass either the one key pair or the dictionary. But before, you had to say time equals this.
Yep.
So the engine just understands, like, either assign a variable or just say whatever.
When you pass in time equals something else, when you pass in time equals something else in like the old way of doing it, which was, I don't have it anymore. When we used to have to do it like this, the moment you do time equals as a argument and not as a default within the class, it actually gets passed in as a dictionary. This is a key value pair. This is time, and the value is datetime. Okay. So let me do return, and I think everything else should work. So for the sake of people who are not understanding this, let's walk through from start to finish what's going on. All this import stuff should be fairly self-explanatory, but just in case, for the sake of everyone, importing the socket library and the datetime library, both of those are part of Python's core library. Then from request.py, I'm importing the entire request library. From response.py, I'm importing the entire response, which we've created right here. We're going to create a server using the socket library, bind it to this local host, which is your machine, this particular port number 9291. I have a while loop that basically just is going to run over and over. I'm listening for connections. Once I hear something, I'm going to create a variable called client connection. and passing the entire connection into request. Request will receive a, like, basically a body of text that the user sent over and parse through that. That's what we've got over here. We're able to keep track of the method and the URI that's being passed in. The method will be important tomorrow, but the URI is all we're looking for right now. We did all of that splitting and the regex stuff last week to basically see what are they sending, which URI do they want to go to. Based off of the URI that was requested, if it's equal to slash, do this line of code on 14. If it's equal to slash time, do this particular bit of this response on line 16. So I've created a response class, and I'm passing in two things. One of them is the name of the template, and second is any variables that I may or may not need. So I've accounted for that here by saying, there's my template name. I'm going to set it to an instance variable because I need to use it down over there. And if you have any template variables, use them. Otherwise, set it equal to an empty dictionary and you're good to go. I'm going to use template variables down over here. So I've gotten most of the same code as before. I've got that build HTML response from way back when. I've just copied and pasted it into another area. Same thing with get template. But the main thing is this dunder string method, which is the stringified representation of this particular instance of the class. So instead of writing, remember when we had like a bunch of like that IO stuff? I don't know if I can go back that far. This, without the dunder string method, is what the representation of this particular instance of the text IO wrapper is. This is basically not really that useful for anybody. So when we do this double underscore string method, it's going to actually return the instance. So there's that going to be the greater than or less than sign. And within there, it's just going to say, this is what's inside of there. So same thing as before, I'm just going to get the template. I'm going to pass that template into Jinja. That's why I've got line 1 over here. I'm going to render that template with the variables that I passed in, and then from there return the response body. That response body is called right over here. I'm going to encode it and then send it out to the user and then close the connection. And I believe that one is we're almost finished with this one. It says our response and a request class is at the same level as server.py despite being custom classes. So we should create a classes folder to house those two classes. Just like we put all the templates inside the templates folder, all your custom classes should go inside of a classes folder. So right now, like every single template that I put goes inside of templates. All the custom classes like request and response kind of should not live at the same level as server.py. So I'm going to create a new folder called classes and put these two classes inside of there, request and response. And the way that I access it is classes.request and classes.response import request and response. Jumping back, 9291, still hello world. Let's make sure that the time is correct. 11:09, 11:09.
Figure out why the Windsor still yells at us.
I don't know. Good question.
The client can, the server accept. It takes in 2 arguments, the message and then the client address.
No, the return of server accept is client connection and client address. That's like saying var1, var2 is equal to 1, 2. So var1 is equal to 1, var2 is equal to 2. It's basically assigning 2 things at one time. So since server.accept, which is some weird thing within socket, returns 2 arguments, you have access to client connection and client address at the same time. But we're not using client address, so we put the underscore in the front.
But you have to initialize them both.
It would turn to 2.
Yep. Returns 2 things. Let's move on to this last little bit. We want to make sure everything works like it used to, and we just did. This last one is the router class. And this is, this particular release is what's called a decorator in Python. I'm just going to say that for right now. So we're going to create a new file called classes/router, and we're going to add this code inside of there. Take a look at that in just a bit. So inside of here, let's get rid of this PyCache folder. I don't know why these keep coming up. Created a file called router.py. I'm going to copy and paste all of this code inside of there and kind of go through it one by one. Let's move this all over. Actually, it's fine. This will run. All right, so first, we've got our class router, which is going to handle all the routes at the class level instead of at the instance level. We have a routes, like a routes array. This is a class method that's going to keep track of all the routes that we have. Every time we create a new route, it's going to process that route and add it to the routes up here. You don't need to know all the stuff that's going down over here. Let's just know that we have one class that keeps track of all the routes inside of this class variable called routes. Every single time we add a new route, we process it, we're going to add it in there. Let's just move on. All right, so we've got this router, and this router is essentially, again, it's going to be reading through all the routes that we've written, adding it to the kind of like a router class for the entire application. And if it finds it, it's going to take you there. Otherwise, it's going to return you not found. We're going to create a controller that basically is like the brains of the operation. Whenever you make a request to a particular website, the first thing it hits is what's called a controller. It's like the brains of it's kind of like the operator of like a hotel. I'm going to hit it and say like, where am I supposed to go and who am I supposed to talk to? So when you call the operator of your hotel, I need to talk to somebody about my room being too cold. All right, let me route you to the correct person. That person is kind of like that, the switchboard of where everything should go. So at the same level as server.py, right over here, I'm going to create something called controller.py. This is where all the business logic and all of the brains of the operation goes. Copy and paste all this code inside of there. So from the router, from the classes folder, get the router and get the response and the date time. So what I'm going to do here is this @router. And again, this is a class method, @router. I'm going to create a route to slash. From there, it's going to be actually saved as the index method. Whenever anybody makes a request to slash, I'm going to use this index method. I'm going to create a response called response with index, same thing that we have right over here. And we're going to return that response. I think we can actually just do return that and be done with it. Same thing here, return response. From there, we're going to remove all the unnecessary libraries and we're just going to import this new controller and this new router so that all of our code essentially looks like this at the end. Specifically, we're going to ask ourselves, what do we need and what do we not need? So we've created a router.py that you don't have to understand most of what's going on here because Django will take care of almost all of this for you. But essentially what we do is we have a router class that keeps track of all the routes, adds stuff to the routes, and process the routes when you actually hit them. It is the URL patterns inside of Django. Anytime anybody makes a request to /route, I'm going to run this code. Anytime anybody runs a request to /time, I'm going to run this code over here. At this point, there's a lot of stuff that I may not need anymore. So it looks like I still need to keep track of requests because I just need to keep track of that request over there. but I might not need to keep track of response anymore since I'm taking care of response over here. So I might be able to get rid of this one altogether, and probably this one altogether. Let's actually just copy this. Let's take a look at the differences. You still need the socket. You still need the date time. It looks like we need to import controller. I think I know why this one doesn't blow up for utilities. Oh, this one blew up for utilities, and I think it's because utilities is probably built into Python and controller is not built into Python. That's my guess, because this one will work. We're going to import the request, and we're also going to import the router. Looks like we don't need date time anymore because it's being served up inside of here on line 3. So we can get rid of this as well. So we can keep most of the stuff more or less the same, but if you take a look here on the right, just change this to Python. There's that multiple variable assignment. I've got host equal to localhost and port equal to 8888. I can change it to 5555 if I want to, but I just chose 888 because just an arbitrary number. We have a listen socket, which is the same thing as what we had before. It's basically like a socket that's listening. We're binding it to the host and the port, which is the same thing that's happening over here. And we're just going to keep listening over and over again. This one means that I think it's true, yeah. It's basically saying, like, just start listening. Then I'm going to say serving HTTP on this particular host and this particular port, which we'll see in just a second. Essentially what we're doing is more or less the same thing. We're listening. We are accepting connections. We're going to get your connection from the server, pass it into request, process it as part of the router response. There's that router.py.process. You're going to get a particular request and pass it in. We're going to grab the URI from there and basically see, is it inside of routes up here? If it is, then return that. Otherwise, and route them to that. Otherwise, I'm going to return not found. From there, I'm going to encode the response that we created a little bit earlier, and then finally close the connection. What is wrong with you? Server.py on line 15. Oh, whoops, I should probably just copy and paste this code in here. All right, so we're serving HTTP on localhost 8888. I jump over to 8888. /time, it's 1118, which matches up. And just the slash, we got the hello world. So in this particular challenge that we've done today, we haven't actually written too much new code, but we've moved a lot of stuff around. Before, when we first started this day, we had, you jump over here, scroll all the way up, we had 2 files, just this request and a server. And it's okay to, for very, very simple projects, to keep everything in 1 or 2 files. But the files will get larger, and the larger they get, the more unwieldy they get, because you have to figure out, oh, it's broken on line 14, which relies on line 4,000, which relies on line 2,000, and you just have to kind of chase things up and down. So instead of having one single giant point of failure, you want to separate things out into different classes and different folders. So I have a folder for just the classes, for all the custom things that I write myself. I've got a folder for just templates, which include HTML files. And then server just keeps track of the most important things that it needs to run and passes off its responsibilities off to smaller classes along the way.
You notice a lot of times controllers usually functional and new and models and unique classes. What do you recommend for more constructing these things? So from all classes, so it's small and functional.
Classes should be object-oriented. Everything else is generally functional.
So the controller will probably.
Most likely, actually, yeah, the controller will definitely be functional.
So I guess on the router, is it just like verifying that you're making a proper request?
Mhm. This is a crude implementation that we found online. Django will give this to you for free. But underneath the hood, it's more or less like this.
So then if you type in like /TIM, it'll return that.
Let's find out. It should. Yep, 404. Okay, let's move on to today's stuff, which is just pretty basic JavaScript inside the browser. If you are looking for a fully finished version, there is of HTTP Server 2. It's in HTTP Server 3, and there is also a pull request from me that you should be able to see that from. All right, so I'm going to talk about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript real quick, and then we'll get started on today's challenges, which will just be JavaScript with the web. So I'm going to go to the desktop, create a folder called Front-End Examples, and I'm going to cd inside of Front-End Example and open the whole thing up in VS Code. All right, so I want to create 3 different files. I'm going to create index.html, index.css, and index.js. So I've got 3 separate files. One is HTML, one's CSS, and one's JavaScript. What is HTML if you had to create an analogy to it? Technically true, but if you had to like explain it to like a 3-year-old, what is HTML? Three-year-old, remember?
A builder?
It's a builder, yeah. It's basically like just the wood beams to a house, like the foundation of the house, just how it like functionally looks when it's being built up. So once you're done with that, you got the CSS, which is, how would you explain the CSS? The paint, yeah. And then finally the JS, the JavaScript. How would you explain that? The wizard? Sure.
There's a video online that explains the 3 of them, and I really like the analogy. It's like 3 Lego pieces: the builder, the artist, and the wizard. Good explanation.
Pretty much, yeah. So I was last year I was visiting my best friend in Arvada, Colorado, and it's a really nice like suburb, and he lived in a subdivision where they were trying to build houses very, very rapidly. So he was in a place like they had built his house, and across the street there were like 15 houses being built. And over the course of a week, I was just watching them like fly through construction. It was really quite incredible. But it always started off the same way. They would always like fill the ground with a foundation, and then they literally brought in on trucks like all the things already built. So the walls, they just dropped right on top of it, and then they just started like welding things together. The roof, they have this giant crane, and they just put it on the top. That was kind of like the HTML behind things. They were building just the foundation, just like the guts of the particular building. Once all the wood was up, and they put all the windows in and everything, people came into the office to basically choose what color paint that they wanted, or if they wanted brick, or if they wanted a particular pillar at the front of their house. It's one of those ones from like, it's kind of like the modern 1950s, like everyone's house looks identical. So if you wanted a pillar, you might get like package number A, which was $5,000. If you wanted like the pillars with the nice brick, that was plus $2,000. And then if you wanted the really nice ones with the 4 pillars, like the White House kind of pillars, that was like plus $10,000. So you get to choose. If you want air conditioning, if you want other things, those are all things that you could do in terms of CSS. What does the aesthetic look of your house look like? So if you got HTML, which is the roots of it, like the base material that you need, the CSS is the like how you want it to look, And then the index.js, this is like the functionality of the house. This is where you could really, really go crazy. So they could do things like heated floors on the entire first floor. That was like a $25,000 upgrade, but that's like the functionality of the house. You could have like you can make your house a smart house, right from the electrical, right from the get-go. That's like the functionality of the house. There's like endless amounts of upgrades that you can do to your house. But the house started at like $600,000 and went up to like $2 million based off the type of upgrade that you can have. So you've got the basic guts of like how it looks. Like that's just the raw construction of it. How do you want it to look? And then how do you want it to function? So same thing with a web page. This is how it like the base of it looks. This is the base of it, like all the necessary foundation. This is how it looks, and then this is the action of it. So I'm just going to create a quick HTML file by doing bang tab, and then we've got all of this here. I'm going to indent a little bit. And let's say I just want a H1 hello world, and then maybe an H2 for my name is Jonathan. I'm just going to launch it on the browser. So let me just open and just double click on index.html. I'm going to drag that whole thing over here and then move this to desktop number 3. All right, so I've got my very basic HTML file. It just says, hello world, my name is Jonathan. This one's an H1 and this one is an H2. Let's say that I wanted to style this. You know, this is Web 1.0. Now I want to make this a little bit nicer looking. I want to change the color of H1 to blue and the background color of H2 to red. There's a variety of things I can do. First one, I could put what's called inline styling. So I could just do style equals and then pass in a whole bunch of styles. But I want to create an external style sheet so that I don't have to redo it over and over and over again. So how do I create an external style? I created an external style sheet for index.css, but I want to link it into here. I need to link it to the head. So anytime I'm referencing something outside, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to put it inside the head. I don't know how to do that because I'm stupid. And I need to find out how to link CSS to HTML. W3 schools, I really do like this because they give you the answers right away and I don't need to think too much. All right, so I could put all the style in the top just like they say here. Nobody wants to do that. Let's do an external sheet. All right, so I'm just going to grab this here, copy and paste it. Let's see what we get. So I'll say this is my awesome site on line 7. And I'm basically saying on line 8, I'm going to bring in an external style sheet. It's going to be called index.css. Now this is relative to where you are right now. So I'm in index.html. What this href is saying is within the same folder as my HTML file, there's a file called index.css. If I was in another folder, I would have to provide the relative path. If it was online, which a lot of times it is, you can just provide that HTTP URL up here. So I've got this here. How do I change all H1s to so that the text is blue and then H2 all the background color is red? H1 color. Nothing super fancy. H2 background color red. So I've got index.css. This is basically saying find every single H1 on the page and change all of the colors to blue. Find all the H2s on the page, change the background color to red. If we jump back over, I refresh, you'll see that this is what we have. Right? I highlighted all of the H1s, changed the colors to blue, and all the H2 changed the background color to red. This is pretty basic stuff. Have we talked about inline versus block elements? Okay. Let's talk about, who knows the difference between an inline and a block element? What is inline?
Inline is when you're writing it inside the HTML, as far as like your CSS or JavaScript.
ones are the ones with the grid.
Block ones are the one with the grid. Kind of true for both, but not exactly.
So block elements should at least stack on top of each other inside your HTML, whereas like an inline, like a span, be side by side.
Kind of. All right. So let's take a look. Let's create a real quick. I don't know how to do this. All right. So this is what we've got over here. We've got block elements that take up the entire span of the entire width of your HTML file. Now, when I said H2, all the H's are all like block elements. What that means is they take up the entire span of the entire page. So when I highlight the H2, you'll notice that when I say the background color, this is a clear demonstration that the H2 takes up the entire screen. This entire thing is going to be like a block element. When I talk about an inline element like this, it's saying that it's only going to affect things within from the start of the tag to the end of the tag, and not the rest of the entire width of the screen. So I just have an href here, but this is nested within an h1 tag. This href is an inline element. It's only affecting the URL thing is only affecting everything within here, which is just visit W3 schools, while h1 is taking care of the entirety of it. So if I change this background color to, I don't know, you'll see that the H1 element affects the entire thing, the entire length of the screen, but the visit W3 schools only affects the portion where it is like directly affected.
What is the A in graphics for? Right values, yeah.
Which one?
Yeah.
It's called an anchor tag. That's how you put links inside of HTML. So we've got HTML. This is the guts of it. We've got index.css, which is how we're going to style it. And then we have index.js, which we're going to talk about today. This is how we give some sort of behavior to this particular file. Let's say that I wanted to throw in an extra, I don't know, let's put a div inside of here. If I want to divide up the HTML document, I can put divs inside of here. I'll give it a class called container. And then I'm going to write this right over here. Get rid of this altogether. Let's just see how this looks. Refresh. Okay. So I've got welcome to my web page, and I've got an interesting article is going to go right over here. Using JavaScript, I have the ability to go inside of my document and alter things on the fly. Let's take a look at this in action. So I'm going to right-click over here, hit Inspect. This is part of Google Chrome. They have all of this built in for you. There's all of these different dev tools, developer tools that we have here on the right. The ones that we're going to focus on today are Elements and Console. Console is if you ever want to run any sort of JavaScript inside your browser, it's going to go inside of here. And Elements is essentially like a representation of it's basically your HTML file. So if I go to like codeplatoon.org, and I right-click, hit Inspect, and go to Elements, this is all the code that goes underneath the hood for CodePlatoon's website. That's how it makes it tick. Similarly, this is all the code that goes in our website, our very interesting welcome to my web page, and makes it tick and look like this. Now let's say that I wanted to change the background color of this from yellow to red because it is Christmas themed. I could either change it over here, but then that would affect everything, or I could basically just select the individual heading and change that background color using JavaScript. So JavaScript will essentially take your entire web page and turn it into what's called the document object model. It's going to look like a tree like this. So the entire window is one element. The window includes a document, which includes all of your, your links and your forms and your anchors, and within there, like your form might have all of this inside of there. But essentially, it looks like a giant tree. We can get from one element to another by chaining them together. So we're going to start with window and then move into document. Since window is always given to us, we can get document by default. So if I were to use just document and just type it in, it's a giant document object that comes back, and that document includes all of our HTML. Now from here, I want to get to the H1 heading. So I could just do document.query selector, it's built in, and find all of the classes called heading, all the IDs called heading. All right. So I found it within the document. So this entire document, which is this entire page, has a query. I'm looking for the heading H1 ID right over here. So I found it. It says, welcome to my web page. Let's just say that const heading is equal to this thing. We have heading right there at the bottom. Make this a little bit bigger. Let's make this heading dot style dot background color is equal to red. And I can change things on the fly using JavaScript. So I can find things on the page, I can alter its style, I can make the, I can change the actual color itself to something else, brown. It's kind of gross, but you can't really tell, but that is brown right over there. But you are able to change things on your screen using just JavaScript. And it looks like some things are happening very quickly. So like a real life example of this is, let's say that you're on Instagram.com. How many people do you think on average per second are on Instagram? I don't know the answer to this.
75.
Per second?
75,000.
75 million. Maybe like, let's say like 30 million people every single second are using Instagram. A bunch of people are also hitting likes on particular photos. And then when you hit the like button, you'll notice that it automatically updates on your screen. Do you think that's actually automatically updating in the background? Probably not. It's probably, so what happens oftentimes is with very popular websites like that, you will hit like or you'll hit a comment and it'll automatically appear on your machine. But in the background, it's sending a request and saying, update this whenever you have time. So it looks like it's updating right away, but it's not always updating right away. And the way that they do that is using JavaScript over here. So let's try something real quick. I'm going to create a...
Can you just go back up?
Yep. Yep.
When you created the variable heading, I just wanted to see what it said. I know, okay, so I guess I'm confused how you're able to change that variable.
Sure. So essentially what's happening is on this first line here is saying, I'm setting a constant variable called heading. I can call this whatever I'd like. I'm saying in the document, find the ID called heading. This hashtag is for find the ID. If I was looking for a class called heading, I'd be doing .class. So I'm selecting something specific on the page. The thing I'm selecting is this H1 ID called heading. I'll call it heading 123 just to make it a little bit more unique. So I'm looking for something on the screen called heading 123. We refresh the page. All right, let's take a look at whatever. So whatever is basically saying inside this document there's a heading, there's an ID called heading 123, and I found it. That's this thing right over here. I want to change the style's color to purple. And you'll notice that the colors change right there from, you know, yellow to purple, or brown to purple.
Could we see the properties on whatever all that console?
Yep. So you can change anything that you want directly on the web page, but once you refresh it, and I go there, you'll see that that style disappeared from before. So if I ever want to go to Code Platoon and I wanted to change something on the website without actually changing something on the website, all I got to do is double click or right click on something, find it, and I'm going to click on this right here. I'm going to find coding bootcamp. So I'll say John sucks. And just like that, John sucks bootcamp. So you are able to alter things on the website, you know, in the browser, but this only lives within your browser. So if I refresh this again, obviously it doesn't update the entire website. Oh, please don't. Okay, there. Change back to coding rather than John sucks.
Did you guys make that website?
It's WordPress.
How would you change something that would like affect the server?
We will talk about that next week. Essentially, you have to alter the database or alter the HTML template that it's reading from. All right, so let's say that we wanted to, every time that we clicked on this heading number 1, it would change the background color to something random or change it to blue at all times. That's something that we can do in JavaScript using something called event listeners. So there are a bunch of event handlers, event listeners. You can find a full list of it inside your curriculum. But there are, you know, like just like dozens. You can, where is it? Here are some of them. There's keyboard events, there's mouse events, there's mouse scroll events. So let's just say there's a mouse event. JavaScript is able to capture what the user is doing on your particular machine just by having all of these things built in. So there is a mouse event button. You get to, if you fire off some sort of mouse event, they may capture the buttons that you were pressing at that particular time. There is a click one that we're going to use today, which basically captures the moment that you click something, JavaScript will automatically detect that and do something in its place. If you've ever gone to a particular website and you filled out, so let me pause real quick.